everyone, good morning. Stay present. So yeah, I'm here this morning to present research that we are doing with Doris, who is here, as you all know now, and Eleonora Black, who couldn't be here, unfortunately. And the title of the research so far at least is Educational Disparities Among Native Children and Children of Immigrants in Italy, Analysis from Pre-Pandemic to Post-Pandemic Periods. So as the title suggests, the idea was to look at ethnic educational inequalities within the COVID-19 timeline. Okay. So here is the outline of this presentation. So at first we wanted to have a brief introduction of the topic, then maybe move a bit to the research review part and see the influence of COVID-19 on the education achievement. Look at our main research questions, then move to data and methods, some results. We won't fit them all, but you will see them later. And some further steps that we are thinking to conduct for enlarge the analysis. So, going to the introduction, the context is in Italy, and we know Italy have this, the demographic of the Italian landscape is evolving. So, for example, if I think of my mom, when she went to school, all her peers were Italians, and now, well, at least they didn't have any migration background. And now we know that this is not the case anymore, so maybe 1 out of 10 students have a migration background. And this is something which has been researched a lot in the literature, so we know that there is kind of a persistent gap between children, native children and the children of immigrants, so that, and this gap usually is called as the ethnic penalty. Many research has been conducted, and we know that some influence can be, for this gap can be, not explained, but at least there is some influence for the socioeconomic status of the students, so that students from, that have a migration background may have a lower socioeconomic status, which could lead to lower educational achievement. And a really important variable, which was found by a research from Clement colleague, was also the cultural aspect, so the language spoken at home from the students and how these influence their educational outcome. Moving on, as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic caused many disruptions in everyday life activity, like going to in-person schooling. And we know that there has been some substantial learning losses, and with that, and this is something that has happened globally. So a very cool analysis from the Towson and colleagues, they did a meta-analysis, so we know that they researched on many papers from different countries of Europe, and we know that in general, during the pandemic, there has been these learning losses, so the achievement was lower, and especially these losses were more severe in mathematics than in readings, and that they were higher for students that had a lower socioeconomic status, and in general it was more pronounced for those countries that they refer to as middle-income countries, and this was in general, like globally, what has happened. Then we moved to the Italian context, and we know that once more there has been some diverse impact, especially once more the higher losses happen to be in readings, so that these losses were more, they had a more influence on mathematics than in readings. And for what concerns gender, so far at least, it seems that there hasn't been the gender gap hasn't widened a lot, especially this research from Borgonovi and Ferrara looks at elementary and middle school. And moving from this very brief research review, what we thought is, okay, so there has been a focus on the educational learning losses within the COVID-19 timeline, with a focus on socioeconomic background and the gender. And what we wanted also to look at was the migration background of the students, and especially the idea was to have a research that looked at the whole COVID-19 timeline, so what happened before the COVID-19 pandemic, what happened when there was this disruption, so when schools were closed, and most importantly, what happened next. So now that we have new data, the question is, now that all schools are opened again, if any gap has been widened or narrowed during the COVID-19 pandemic, what has happened after? And so these are basically our three main research questions. To analyze, to conduct this research, we analyzed the INVALSI data. I'm not going to spend any time on that because we all know them. We used population data, and we wanted to have an understanding of the general situation, so we looked at all the educational levels, so grade 2, 5, 8, 10, and 13. And we looked for the pre-pandemic cohorts, let's say, for the data for 2018-19, for the COVID cohorts, the data from 2020-21 and 21-22. And for the recovery year, we looked at the data from 2023 when all schools were opened again, fully open again. We used some linear regression models to predict the scores for mathematics and for reading, and we looked at the migration background of the students, dividing them in 4 groups. So we have natives, so students that were born in Italy and both of their parents were also born in Italy. Mixed couples, so students that have one parent born abroad and the other one in Italy, regardless of where the student was born. And second generation and first generation are quite self-explanatory. We added some control variables, such as gender, socioeconomic status, the years of birth, the birth year of the students, if they attended preschool, the language spoken at home, that as we saw from the literature was a very influential variable. And we also added a dummy for the school fixed effect. So now, before moving to the results, we couldn't fit all of the results here for your sake and our sake, and also for the time. So we are just going to look at the results for mathematics, and we picked only 3 cases, so one for each educational level, so one for elementary school, one for middle school, and one for high school, and especially we looked at the one where then there is a pass from an educational level to another, so the 5th grade for elementary school and the 13th grade for high school. What we see in this graph, I hope that you can all see the dots. We have as the reference category the natives, and then we have the results of the coefficient for memory regression analysis for mixed students, second generation and first generation. This is for grade 5. What we see, and then the blue line divides simply what happens before COVID and after COVID. And we see that basically for mixed students and second generation students, the trend is always the same, so they go kind of in a parallel trend. And they always achieve lower than their native counterpart. For what concerns first generation students, they're the ones who perform the worst. And what is more important to notice is in the last dots that you see on your right, which is the years of the recovery, they do not recover at all, and if anything, they keep getting worse in their educational achievement, while this doesn't hold that much true for the other 2 categories. For what concerns grade 8, the picture is very similar to the other that we saw. So yeah, once more we have native students who perform the best and all the rest that perform worse, with first generation students who are the ones who perform the worst compared to their peers. Now, before moving to the last graph, maybe I'm going to pause for a dramatic effect because the picture will be a bit different. And here we see, for grade 13 in mathematics, that once more we have mixed students who perform the best after the native counterpart, but we see that first generation students outperform the second generation peers. And this holds true for all the years except for the last year, so for the recovery year, because we see that there is a negative trend, so that the gap widened for first generation students, until they reach in 2022-23 a point where they shift reverse, and so second generation students actually outperform their first generation counterpart, as we see that they experience a huge drop at the beginning of the pandemic, but then they are able to recover, and this doesn't hold true for the first generation students. So in general, to answer our research question, for what concern what happened before COVID, the results were quite in line with the literature. So we know that for, native students outperform their migration counterpart. Let's call it like this way, even if it's not cool. During the pandemic, we see that students in lower grades exhibit an initial resilience, but then they experience a drop, and this trend is reversed for what concerns higher education. In the post-pandemic period, it is kind of mixed, because in primary school we see a decrease. In middle school, we do see a recovery for everyone, but not for first-generation students. And for what concerns higher grades, there is a recovery, but only for second-generation students. And this is true both for reading and for mathematics. But here, once more, we only could fit the mathematics results. So, some food for thought. We did see some unexpected, at least for us, trends in grade 13 and grade 10 for mathematics, as first-generation students were outperformed their second-generation counterpart. From the literature, we know that immigrants' family usually tends to have higher educational achievement, but we also know that usually this is not something that we see from evidence, from the literature, but it was something that we noticed in our analysis. So some further steps that we were thinking to take. From the beginning, when we looked at the data and the methods, we used as control variables and for the fixed school effect. But we think that it would be maybe interesting to go with some multi-level analysis to understand if the disparity that we see are something which are more linked to individual characteristics of the students, or if it is something that has to do maybe with local differences. So we wanted to look at regions and provinces, and since the data from INVALSI allows it, maybe also some school level characteristics, so also the digital proficiency of students and the leadership of the headmaster. That's it. Just a quick reminder, it is the goal of our Agenda 2030 to ensure an equitable and quality education for everyone, so let's work on it. Thanks.